Distancing.
Public places are turning into powder kegs of anger and fear.
Are you serious? Did you just cough at me?
2 passengers on a train in Australia got into an argument over coughing. In Thailand, a woman was restrained after it was said she deliberately coughed on a flight attendant. The plane was delayed due to coronavirus screening, and she wanted to get off. Here in the U.S., NBA officials are considering extreme social distancing measures by banning all fans. LeBron James, basketball's biggest star, says if that happens, he won't play.
I ain't playing. If I ain't got the fans in the crowd, that's who I play for.
Across the USA, festivals, conferences, sporting events, and vacations are being canceled. Colleges and schools are shutting down. All this, together with an oil price war, has Wall Street seriously spooked.
U.S. markets are on track to have their worst day in more than a decade. The short-term risk here is we could have a 1/4 downturn of a recession, because when people don't go out, they don't go to crowded areas, they don't do what they normally do in an economy, there's always, that's the fear factor.
Remember how I used to stroke your hair?
SNL did its best to relieve the anxiety, poking fun at all that social distancing.
Mrs. Touch. In the meantime, there has been concern that the president and vice president may have been exposed to the virus after an attendee at last week's CPAC gathering of conservatives has tested positive for coronavirus. 2 lawmakers who met the attendee have quarantined themselves just to be safe. Ann Mercogliano has more.
The coronavirus crisis just got one handshake closer to President Trump. This photo shows the president greeting the chairman of CPAC last week at the annual conference of conservative activists and elected officials. Now the chairman, Matt Schlapp, is confirming that before he shook hands with the president, he had incidental contact with a 55-year-old man who has tested positive for COVID-19. The handshake at CPAC puts Trump just 2 degrees of separation away from the virus. Schlapp also shook hands with first daughter Ivanka Trump, her husband Jared Kushner, and the president's daughter-in-law Laura Trump. Schlapp tells Fox News he has no symptoms.
I feel healthy as a horse.
White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham.
The President of the United States, as we all know, is quite a hand washer. He uses hand sanitizer all the time, so he's not concerned about this at all.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz says he also briefly interacted with the infected man at CPAC and is now in self-quarantine out of an abundance of caution. Florida Representative Matt Gaetz revealed he's under self-quarantine as well after coming into contact with the corona patient at CPAC. Ironic because he was criticized for mocking the crisis last week by wearing a gas mask. Today the president continued to deny that the nation is in crisis. He shook hands with well-wishers when he arrived in Orlando for a fundraiser and raged on Twitter. The fake news media and their partner, the Democrat Party, is doing everything within its semi-considerable power to inflame the coronavirus situation, far beyond what the facts would warrant. The president also says he has no plans to cancel his campaign rallies, which can draw as many as 20,000 people into one arena.
We'll have tremendous rallies.
The nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says bad idea.
If we continue to see the community spread go up, I think you need to seriously look at anything that's a large gathering.
Talk about mixed messages.
If you're having a political rally in an area where there is actual community spread, probably not a good idea. If there isn't community spread and you're at a rally, the best thing is don't shake hands, make sure you hand sanitize, wash yourself, and if you're sick, don't go.
As for the Democrats, it also seems to be business as usual on the campaign trail.
President Trump has continued to use Twitter to comment on the health crisis, and he's coming under criticism for some of those comments. For instance, the president said he didn't know people actually died from the flu, which is surprising because his own grandfather died because of it.
President Trump's claim that he's shocked to hear thousands of people die from the flu each year in America is being met with a bit of disbelief.
I never heard those numbers. I would have been shocked. I would have said, does anybody die from the flu? I didn't know people died from the flu.
That's our president.
Because his grandfather,
Yours, not
Frederick
mine.
Trump, dropped dead from the flu. Frederick Trump was born in a small town in Germany, Karlstadt, and immigrated to America in 1905 and settled in Queens, New York. But during the great 1918 influenza pandemic, Frederick Trump was stricken. In fact, he became one of the first American casualties of the epidemic that would go on to claim the lives of 50 million worldwide.
He was walking down the street in May of 1918, and suddenly he said to his son, "I don't feel well." They went home, and as President Trump's father later related it to me, he got in bed and he died.
Biographer Gwenda Blair wrote, "The Trumps, 3 generations of builders and a president."
When I was hearing the amount of people that died with the flu, I was shocked to hear it.
The author says she's pretty sure the president would know the flu kills people just based on family history.
President Trump is known as a bit of a germaphobe.
Because he's a liar.
To do with his grandfather dying of the flu? I remember once when I interviewed him and he shook my hand and he said, "You're privileged because I shook your hand." I am absolutely sure that 1 inch away from the camera there was somebody with a bottle of Purell. He is very, very, very germophobic.
Around the country, the prudent thing to do is self-quarantine if you think you've had contact with a known coronavirus patient, and to stay home if you're suffering a fever or flu-like symptoms. But how do you keep from going stir-crazy? Les Trent spoke with a couple who are healthy, but they're staying home after being at synagogue with a man now hospitalized with the virus. And here's how they're coping.
This is one way Ellen Heilman copes with self-quarantine: gardening. And this is how her husband Samuel gets his exercise: walking laps around the yard.
Literally walking in circles.
Samuel and Ellen are in self-imposed isolation at their home in Westchester County, New York, after attending the same synagogue as lawyer Lawrence Garbaz, who is hospitalized in critical condition with coronavirus.
We are currently in quarantine until the 14th.
73-year-old Samuel is a professor of sociology. He's trying to make the best of his situation by working on a book at home. 72-year-old Ellen, a psychologist, is seeing her patients via FaceTime. On downtime, she's also making the best of these difficult days.
I'm trying to organize my household, catch up on reading, and
even a little yoga. Ellen, you've gotten stir crazy.
They've even made a lighthearted video for their grandkids in which Ellen tries to escape quarantine.
Ellen, get away from the window!
Thousands of Americans are now believed to be in self-quarantine. Now, lifestyle expert Trey Bodge has advice for anyone in quarantine or facing quarantine in the future.
It's a good time to organize your basement. It's a good time to iron your clothes or do some sewing projects. Things like that to keep you busy will be great, especially if you're at home for 2 to 3 weeks.
Disinfecting the home is a quarantine must.
So those common areas is what's really important here. So what that means is anything that you may have touched that other members of your family or guests may have touched. So doorknobs, banisters, counters, anything like that should be wiped down with disinfectant wipes or disinfectant spray to make sure that you're killing those germs.
And here's a quarantine no-no.
You don't want to share linens, towels, anything like that with anyone else in your family.
And later in the broadcast, we'll show you some foods that can help boost your immune system during this period of infection. Other news today, the fair